In the middle of the war, inside a quiet German briefing room, a number appeared on the wall. Not a weapon, not a battle map, a number. One plane, every 5 minutes. At first the generals laughed, then they stopped, because the report didn't come from propaganda. It came from their own intelligence officers. Factories that never slept, assembly lines longer than airfields, workers replacing bomb damage faster than it could be caused. One German general reportedly whispered, "This is not a country. This is a machine." And in that moment, the war changed, without a single shot being fired. Keep watching to understand why this realization terrified Germany more than any battlefield defeat. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. By the early years of World War II, German confidence was built on speed. Speed of invasion. Speed of coordination. Speed of collapse. Poland had fallen quickly. France even faster than expected. Across Europe, German generals believed they had perfected modern warfare. But while Germany focused on conquering territory, something else was happening across the Atlantic. America was not rushing to the front. America was building. At first, German leadership underestimated the United States. Many saw it as divided, distant, and inexperienced in large-scale war. American industry, they believed, was strong but unfocused, civilian-minded, too comfortable. That assumption would become one of the most dangerous mistakes of the war. In 1942, German intelligence units began collecting industrial reports, not rumors, not press statements, but verified production data. What they found didn't match their expectations. American aircraft factories weren't operating like European workshops. They were operating like ecosystems. Raw materials entered one end, finished aircraft rolled out the other, and the flow never stopped. Ford's Willow Run plant became a symbol of this transformation. It wasn't just a factory, it was a city of steel in motion. Conveyor belts stretched longer than some German airstrips. Workers were trained to perform a single task with near-perfect efficiency. When one part failed inspection, another replaced it immediately. There were no pauses, no ceremonies, no waiting for speeches, just output. German analysts noticed something else that was deeply unsettling. America planned for loss. Factories were built assuming bomb damage. Supplies were stockpiled assuming disruption. Workers were trained in redundancy. If one line went down, another replaced it. If one factory slowed, 5 more accelerated. This wasn't improvisation. It was design. In Germany, production was centralized. Skilled labor was limited. Bombing one factory could delay an entire weapons program. In America, bombing one factory barely changed the numbers. By mid-1943, German intelligence briefings included charts that made senior officers uncomfortable. Aircraft output curves didn't rise gradually. They exploded upward. Fighters, bombers, transport planes, every category increasing simultaneously. One internal report estimated that America could replace its entire air fleet faster than Germany could replace a single major loss. That's when the phrase began circulating quietly among officers. You cannot outfly a country that builds faster than you destroy. Some generals resisted the conclusion. They argued quality would prevail over quantity. German planes were superior, they said. Better engineering, better pilots. But numbers have a way of changing the definition of better. When American aircraft losses were analyzed, German officers realized something horrifying. Losses didn't slow production. They accelerated it. Every destroyed plane justified a larger budget. Every crash improved the design. Every delay triggered another factory expansion. This was not an economy reacting to war. This was an economy optimized for it. By the time the Allies launched sustained bombing campaigns over Europe, German commanders finally understood the scale of what they faced. They were not fighting just soldiers. They were fighting logistics, schedules, assembly lines. A system that did not panic, did not hesitate, did not tire. One German general later admitted, "We could plan for battles. We could plan for campaigns. But we could not plan for an enemy who produced faster than time itself." And that realization, quiet, mathematical, unavoidable, marked the beginning of the end. Because wars are not only won by courage, they are won by capacity. And America had turned capacity into a weapon. By late 1943, German commanders were no longer arguing about whether America could produce aircraft at an extraordinary rate. That debate was over. Now the question was simpler and far more dangerous. How do you fight a nation that treats war like mass production? Inside German high command meetings, maps were still spread across tables. Arrows still showed planned movements, but alongside those maps sat folders filled with charts, production graphs, factory counts, shipping schedules, and those charts told a story no battlefield ever could. American aircraft production didn't just grow, it multiplied. One factory became 3, 3 became 10. Entire regions were reorganized around output. German intelligence officers reported something unsettling. American civilians spoke about production numbers the way other nations spoke about sports scores. Newspapers celebrated milestones. Radio hosts announced totals. Workers posed for photos beside completed aircraft like athletes after a victory. This wasn't hidden. It was public. And it kept getting worse. American shipyards began launching aircraft carriers faster than Germany could plan responses. Transport planes appeared in numbers so large that German planners struggled to calculate interception rates. One internal German memo warned, "Enemy air losses no longer reduce enemy air presence." That sentence changed everything, because traditional warfare relied on attrition. Wear them down, outlast them, force exhaustion. But how do you exhaust a system designed to replace itself instantly? German pilots began reporting skies filled with unfamiliar silhouettes. New models appeared before old ones were fully understood. American aircraft didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be present, and they were everywhere. At the same time, German factories faced shortages. Skilled labor was stretched thin. Bombing raids forced repairs instead of expansion. Production lines paused, restarted, then paused again. Every delay mattered. In contrast, American factories planned delays into their schedules. If one plant slowed, another compensated. If materials were rerouted, output barely changed. If workers quit, replacements were trained immediately. German generals began to understand something deeply uncomfortable. They weren't competing against pilots. They were competing against time. One officer reportedly said, "We measure production in months. They measure it in minutes." The psychological impact was enormous. German command culture valued precision and mastery. To see war reduced to numbers, raw, unstoppable numbers, felt almost insulting. And yet, numbers don't argue. They don't negotiate. They don't fear. They accumulate. Reports from the air front became increasingly grim. German pilots faced formations so large that individual skill mattered less than survival. Even successful engagements felt meaningless when replacements arrived the next day. Meanwhile, American training programs expanded. Pilots were trained faster, standardized, and rotated efficiently. Losses were expected, not tragic, but calculated. That realization shook German leadership to its core, because it meant the war was no longer about winning battles. It was about whether Germany could survive being outproduced. By early 1944, some German strategists privately admitted the truth. Even if every tactical decision went perfectly, the industrial gap was too wide. One general summarized it bluntly. "They are not beating us in combat. They are burying us in output." And still, the machines kept running. Planes rolled off assembly lines day and night. Engines were tested, installed, and shipped without pause. Logistics chains stretched across oceans with clockwork reliability. Germany could destroy factories, but it could not destroy momentum. That momentum was now carrying the Allies toward Europe itself. And when invasion plans began to solidify, German commanders understood that they weren't preparing to repel an army. They were preparing to face an industrial tide, one that did not stop, one that did not slow, one that did not care how strong you were yesterday, only how many you could replace tomorrow. And Germany could no longer keep up. By the spring of 1944, German generals were no longer shocked. Shock had passed. What replaced it was something far worse: certainty. The certainty that America's production machine was not slowing. The certainty that no strategic adjustment could close the gap. The certainty that the war had entered a phase. Germany was never built to survive. In briefing rooms across occupied Europe, commanders stared at aerial reconnaissance photos that barely stayed relevant for a week. New airfields appeared where fields had been empty. Temporary runways turned permanent. Supply depots multiplied. And above them all, aircraft. Constant, layered, endless. German radar operators reported waves that didn't thin. Interceptors launched, returned damaged, and launched again, only to face the same numbers waiting. Pilots began describing American air power not as formations, but as weather. It rolled in, it stayed, and it covered everything. Meanwhile, intelligence updates from the United States painted a picture that felt unreal to European planners. Entire towns existed only to support factories. Assembly lines ran in shifts so seamless that machines never cooled. Women, teenagers, retirees, everyone had a role. Production manuals were simplified. Training times shortened. Efficiency replaced perfection. American engineers accepted small flaws if it meant speed. German engineers were trained to eliminate flaws, even if it meant delays. That difference, tiny on paper, became fatal in practice. German high command had built its strategy on brilliance. America built its strategy on scale. By mid-1944, the imbalance reached the air war over Europe. German aircraft production still existed, but every loss mattered now. Every plane destroyed was a calculation. Every pilot lost was irreplaceable experience. On the Allied side, aircraft losses were recorded, replaced, and absorbed. Not emotionally, logistically. German commanders began using a new phrase in their internal reports: material exhaustion. It didn't mean defeat yet, but it meant the end of initiative. Germany could react. It could not dictate, and reactions came too late. As Allied bombing intensified, German factories moved underground. Production lines were split. Parts were transported separately to avoid total loss. But fragmentation slowed everything. Meanwhile, American factories stayed above ground, bright, organized, protected by distance and oceans. Even when German intelligence identified key American plants, there was nothing they could do about them. The war had crossed a boundary Germany could not follow. One senior German officer reportedly remarked, "We no longer fight their army, we fight their calendar." And the calendar was not on Germany's side. As D-Day approached, German planners knew an invasion was coming. They just didn't know where. But the real fear wasn't location. It was volume. How many planes would support the landings? How many transports? How many replacements? The numbers on paper felt absurd. Yet experience had taught them one painful lesson. American numbers always arrived. When Allied forces finally moved, the sky itself seemed crowded. German anti-aircraft units fired until barrels overheated. Fighters scrambled into impossible odds. And still, the formations came. German generals realized then that the battle for Europe wasn't being decided by tactics alone. It was being decided by factories thousands of miles away. Factories that never heard the sound of bombs. Factories that never stopped. From that moment on, German leadership began planning not for victory, but for damage control. How long could they delay? How much could they slow the inevitable? How many resources could they conserve? Because the truth had finally settled in. Even if Germany won every local engagement, it would still lose the war of replacement. America could build a plane every 5 minutes. Germany could not afford to lose one every 5 hours. And in war, math is unforgiving. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with resignation. A quiet understanding that the war had changed shape, and Germany was no longer shaping it. By late 1944, the question inside German high command was no longer how to win. It was how to endure. The maps on the walls still changed. Front lines still shifted. Orders were still issued. But belief, the kind that sustains nations at war, had quietly drained away. German generals now understood something no propaganda speech could erase. America wasn't fighting this war with desperation. It was fighting it with capacity. Every Allied advance came backed by replacement. Every loss came with a reserve. Every delay only allowed more equipment to arrive. The air war made this undeniable. German pilots no longer counted enemy aircraft. They estimated fuel exhaustion instead. They planned sorties knowing survival odds before takeoff. And worse, they knew the enemy pilots waiting across the channel would be replaced before sunset. Reports from the Western Front described American airfields operating like ports. Planes landed, refueled, rearmed, launched again. There was no dramatic pause. No build-up, just continuity. German officers began using phrases that would have been unthinkable in earlier years: unsustainable, irrecoverable, mathematically impossible. This wasn't fear speaking. It was calculation. In underground bunkers, generals ran projections that ended the same way every time. More American planes, more crews, more fuel, more factories. The numbers didn't lie. Even Germany's last technological hopes, advanced fighters, rockets, experimental designs, couldn't change the equation. Innovation without volume was no longer enough. A single advanced aircraft meant nothing against thousands of reliable ones. And the German leadership knew it. The war had shifted from brilliance to balance sheets, from tactics to throughput, from courage to capacity. One German planner reportedly wrote in a private memo, "They build what they need faster than we can destroy it." That sentence marked the real defeat. Because wars are not only won by courage, they are won by continuity, by the ability to absorb loss and continue forward. America could do that. Germany could not. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe, German resistance continued, but without illusion. Every defense was temporary, every counterattack limited, every delay measured in days, not outcomes. The generals had stopped imagining reversals. They planned withdrawals instead, and through it all, American production never slowed. Even as the war neared its end, factories kept building. Planes rolled off lines destined, not just for the current war, but for the world that would follow. That was perhaps the most sobering realization of all. America wasn't just winning the war, it was shaping the peace. When Germany finally collapsed, it wasn't because its soldiers stopped fighting. It was because the system behind them could no longer keep up. The war had outgrown them. And when historians later asked how it became inevitable, many pointed not to a single battle, but to a realization that spread quietly through German high command. You cannot outfight an enemy who can replace everything you destroy before you even finish counting. A plane every 5 minutes wasn't just a statistic. It was a message, a warning, and in the end, a verdict.